Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burroughs. Aunt Jenny and her companions are on their way to Jinnistan and have stopped at an inn run by Nephilim, which is to say, by giants. The main room of the Ferryman's Rest was large and spacious and smelled of roasting meats, fish, and vegetables. Most of the tables were of Nephil scale, though some had high chairs for human-sized or smaller folk. Helgrim ushered them to a human-scale table with one chair more suited for three, who scrambled happily onto it. "Flora," he called out, "you've a party of travelers." His wife proved to be a beautiful, heavy-set woman nearly his size. "Welcome to his rest and my labor," she laughed heartily. "What can we do for you? A large meal now, or just a bit to tide you over, and a big meal later? You staying with us? There's weather coming in." Aunt Jenny turned to Sasha and raised an eyebrow in question. Sasha answered, "Maybe it's just the growth spurt, but I could eat a big meal now," she smiled at Aunt Jenny, "and maybe another later." Aunt Jenny nodded. "Very well." She turned back to Flora. "It looks like a big meal. Big for us, at least. I doubt that even Sasha would be able to keep up with your folk." Flora grinned. "Very good. A little big meal. What do you like? Auroch, trout, cheese, bread, grains, tubers, roots?" "That sounds wonderful," replied Sasha. Flora laughed. "Fine. Portions, small portions of everything, and you'll tell us when to stop?" "Yes, thank you." "To drink? Mead, beer, wine, cider, milks, winter wine, distilled spirits? Something not too strong. I'm not used to heavy drinking. Thin beer, watered wine, mead or cider diluted with unfermented juice?" "Diluted cider." "Very well. And you, my lady?" And she turned to three. "And sir?" "The cider for me, undiluted for the first one at least," said Aunt Jenny. "Acorn ale," said three. The meal being large, and the group having slept during the heat of the day as they crossed the burning lands, they retreated to their rooms for a nap after eating. The sound of wind and rain on the roof woke Jenny in the early evening. She went down to the common room to find Sasha already there. "Jenny, over here," called Sasha. "Look who wandered in." There, sitting with Sasha and three at a large round table in the corner of the room by a hearth, was Philum, the dryad. "We saved you a big chair." "Thank you, my dear," said Aunt Jenny as she and Big Tom settled into the leather-padded chair. Rudy curled up at her feet, and once she was seated, little Dickens climbed into her lap. "Well, it looks like I'm settled in, or we are." Turning to the nymph, she asked, "What brings you here? Did you finish your errand?" "To be honest, it was you, Aunt Jenny. Some time after we parted, I realized who you might be. Aunt Jenny, little Jenny, great Jennifer, young Lady Jennifer, the forerunner. I consulted the root meat and learned that you had been seen across the lands." "The root meat?" asked Aunt Jenny. "Aye, 'tis a forest and dryad thing. The woods can talk, chatter, gossip. Word passes root by root throughout a wood. The roots of plants and growing things intermingle where you cannot see. Think of a spider's web. The spider sitting on the web can feel aught that happens throughout the web. 'Tis so with roots, and trees do love gossip by leaf or root. We dryads and the wiser trees meet upon this root web work and pass what we know." Sasha smiled and nodded. "Yes, we learned about mycorrhizal networks in AP biology class. Very cool. Whole forests working together. You can almost view a forest as one great big living organism. That's got to be a really big deal for dryads." "Well, there's a conversation I never expected to hear. One of my girls discussing mycorrhizal networks with a dryad." Aunt Jenny gave her head a little shake. "So the trees, the root meat, has been gossiping about me?" Yes, said Philip seriously. The Fey folk of Ilum Crown and the World Tree have a close relationship. Little goes on there that isn't noted. Could you then get a message to Maeve for me? She asked. Yes, milady. That is to say that some semblance of it would be passed by, but would travel by so many routes that would change a goodly amount along the way. Trees and men share very few words or notions. Chinese whispers, the telephone game, exclaimed Sasha. Aunt Jenny chuckled. Keep it in mind for your thesis. Dyadic telephone on the degree of semantic drift exhibited in telecommunications mediated by mycorrhizal networks by A. Levin and F. de Havilland. She turned to Philip. Forgive us our outlandish humor. We're far from home. You were saying? Only that your fame is spreading and that many are encouraged by your long-awaited arrival. It seemed proper to come and find you, replied Philip. I offer my assistance. Your arrival is most welcomed. After a moment he added, If you do wish to get a message to Queen Maeve, I may indeed be able to help. There are ways to craft a message that is less garbled along the way, and which can be recovered to an extent from the garbling that does occur. So, should I be concerned about how much is said about me by or through the root meat? Are my enemies likely to be listening or informed about what is said? Aye, milady, 'tis in part why I sought you out, to warn you that your movements may be followed both by those who favor you and by those who do not. She turned to Sasha. So, network privacy and security are a problem on the network in this world, as well as the one we came from. Sasha smiled and shrugged. More material for a thesis? Yes, but the danger may be practical and real as well. And to be honest, milady, added the Dryad, you bring the danger with you. She has few friends or allies hereabouts, but she, her agents, or army might well follow you here. That shouldn't surprise me. I am, in fact, recruiting allies against her, or at least those who will support me enough to help supply me. I don't suppose I should expect to do this in complete secrecy. I could really use a military strategist and tactician. I guess that was the role Vrayan would have served if I hadn't been late to the ball. Well, chimed in Sasha, we do have Skathach and the Khatan and a couple of queens on our side, and if conducting a war was the key thing, I suppose they could have handled it themselves. Right, my dear. So just what am I here for? Al-Bahith was clear on the artifacts that I, or we, would use, but not so much on what would be done with them. Do something heroic or clever with them, I suppose, Aunt Jenny, said Sasha. That would be fine if I were a hero, a doer of good deeds. Back where I come from, there are men who do nothing all day but good deeds. They are called, good deed doers, quoted Sasha, and they have no more courage than you have. I think you're mixing that up a bit, my dear. So I'm not a very good wizard or humbug. Still, the point remains it's not what you're called that matters. It's what you do. And as one of my very best teachers once told me, knowing and believing in yourself is important, especially hereabouts. If we in the world can be shaped by what we believe, then we had better have strong positive images of ourselves and not let the whims of others define us or what we do. You are determined to be the teacher, aren't you? Not me. I'm just the lowly sword fodder. She paused. No, now I'm doing it. I know, I'm the heroic companion, the champion, unless someone more obvious comes along. I'm the sword-bearer, charged by Morwenna to be your strong right arm. I've been grown for the part. They sat in silence for a bit, and then Aunt Jenny noticed the great door open. A short, heavy-set figure walked in, a dwarf in heavy leathers and a chainmail shirt, an axe over his shoulder. Jenny sat bolt upright in surprise. Drummer? Here? You're a dwarf, Aunt Jenny shook her head. That kind of dwarf. His laugh would have suited a man twice his size as he walked over to their table. He stopped and set the head of his axe on the floor before him. Resting both hands on the axe's butt, he leaned forward and squinted at her. Jen, yep, Jen. By my beard, you're the great Jennifer? His laugh dwarfed his previous one. But you're right, true enough. A dwarf and not a little person. Proud of it. Well, I'll be... Aunt Jenny shook her head. Please, won't you join us for dinner? Gladly. He turned to Philip. Good evening, Philip. You're right, mostly. She is someone I should meet, just not for the first time. Flora delivered a tall chair for the dwarf and asked what they all wanted to eat. After they'd asked for a variety of food all round, Sasha turned to Aunt Jenny. Where'd you two meet? Woodstock, answered Aunt Jenny. 3 days of peace and music, came the dwarf's gravelly answer. Say what? You two met at the Woodstock Music Festival back in the 60s? asked Sasha. It's true. I was a roustabout, helping to put the place together, and she was running a cook tent, feeding doctors, nurses, and patients. Woodstock had dwarven workmen from Faerie? I don't know about workmen, but at least one. I was born in High Dwarragard, beyond the Summerlands, so yeah, I was a workman from Faerie. Good thing, too. Do you think those towers would have stayed up with all those young idiots climbing them without some serious help? Aunt Jenny laughed. I just thought you were high when you claimed to be from Fairyland. I told you little Jenny wasn't the only one who'd been back and forth. Yes, and that other fellow, what was his name? From the bummer tent, kept talking about the giant spiders all around unless someone kept his mind off them. People said a lot of things. Aye, but I meant it and wasn't hallucinating. A long and progressively less comfortable silence spread over the table. Eventually, Aunt Jenny broke it. I suppose you're wondering what took me so long in getting here. Drumthortle nodded. The question did cross my mind. You seemed the sort back then who'd heed the call of folks in need. The problem is that I never got the message, nor the key unlocking the way here, not for 45 years or more. It got waylaid by someone ill-equipped to understand it. So after working in the field hospital at Woodstock, I studied nursing, married a doctor, then nursed him while he got sick and died, and started teaching young ladies and maintaining a library. After I retired from that, my inheritance arrived, and here we are trying to clean up the mess. Well, Jen, if you did those jobs as well as you ran the cook tent and cared for everyone, then I'll wager you did just fine. Well, thanks. You make me wonder, though, why didn't you or someone come looking for me? The dwarf nodded and smiled crookedly. It's a big world, the mortal lands, and few of us ornery enough to travel there had no idea who the great Jennifer was, or where in all that world she'd be hiding. We ain't supposed to travel there no more. Your folks don't believe in magic and fairies, and that's a good thing. And I never told you my name, where I was from, or that Aunt Jenny was my great-aunt. Drumthortle stared at the bottom of his beer stein. To think we came so close. He shook his head. I knew the great Jennifer before the troubles. Blast! He pounded his fist on the table. I should have looked. You want to know the worst of it, old friend? Jenny asked, looking into her glass. No, but go ahead. My name is Jennifer Winston, the same as my great-aunt, young Jennifer, or as she is known in the books and movies, Little Jenny, and our family has lived in the town of Winston since it was named after my multi-great-grandfather. Any librarian could have found me easily. Well, if I'd only known a librarian, he laughed. Of course you weren't one when I needed it. They talked and drank and ate Flora's cooking for hours before retiring. They were all exhausted and more than a little tipsy and very full by the time Aunt Jenny collapsed into the luxury of one of the Ferryman's Rest's comfortable feather beds. Jen. His voice was soft and gentle. Jen. Just a little longer, Tom. Jen, we need to talk. Oh, all right, I'll get up. No, don't bother. No need to get out of bed. We can talk here. He shifted in the bed and stroked her hair. She snuggled closer and inhaled his scent. What is it? She is on the move. Her dragons, her armies, they're attacking everywhere. The queens need to know what you want. We need to know how you are. I'm fine, so far. Can anyone overhear us talking? I don't think so. Tell them we can talk over the wood wide web. I have a dryad with me. We're headed into the mountains. Good. And how are you, Jen? Really well. We have a good team, and we're growing and getting stronger. I know. I've been watching you even when we couldn't talk. What I couldn't tell is how you're taking it. Is it wearing you down? No. There are times when it seems too much, when I doubt myself, but there are so many good people. And seeing you again. She sighed and snuggled closer. Am I asleep? She asked. Mostly. You need the rest, and I'm right here. He snuggled closer, his strong arm heavy as it rested on her. Aunt Jenny awoke, her arms wrapped around a pillow, in a bed filled with cats and dog, the touch of a parting kiss lingering on her forehead. Sunlight streamed in the windows, and the scent of food wafted up from below. She looked around and said, I hope you can still hear me, Tom. Thank you. I needed that. She dressed, gathered her knitting, Rudy and the cats, and headed downstairs. Flora seated her at the same table by the hearth where the group had sat the night before. May I bring you some breakfast or something hot to drink, Aunt Jenny? Asked Flora. Not until the others start to join me. Then I'd like the fruity herb tea and something hot with bread or pastry and meat. I'll just sit and knit until then, thank you. It is still quite early, so she managed to get a moderate amount of knitting done, despite little Dickon's eager assistance, before Philum and Drumthortle had joined her, and Flora brought tea and a flaky crusted meat pie. A few minutes later, Sasha came down the stairs, and as she approached the table, the inn's large double doors swung open, seemingly blown in by the wind, and there was no one there for a heartbeat or two. A winged woman, the very image of an angel, flew down and landed just inside the door, folding her snow-white wings behind her. She was at least as beautiful as Philum, with olive skin and white hair held back in a silvery circlet. She was dressed in some sort of huge diaphanous scarf or shawl draped over her shoulders. It crossed her breasts, wrapped a time or two around her waist, and tied at one hip. As she strode majestically across the room in their direction, her wings seemed to shrink until they disappeared. She arrived at their table shortly after Sasha. Are you an angel? Stammered Sasha. Me? Why, no. Whatever made you think that? Replied the newcomer. I don't know. Perhaps the wings? Blurted Sasha. The woman, not an angel, laughed in a sparkling way that no human could match. You might call me a Peri. She stopped directly across the table from Aunt Jenny and nodded her head. Lady Jennifer, may I suppose? You may, and this, she gestured, is my companion Sasha. Sasha rested the palm of her hand on the pommel of her sword and bowed rather more elegantly than she had managed to speak. And may we know who you are? Asked Aunt Jenny. You may call me Finna. Were you looking for me? I had heard you came into our land. You are from hereabouts, then? Nearby, the foothills. Will you join us for breakfast? The Peri nodded. Sasha, come sit by me. Finna? Aunt Jenny gestured to the chair opposite her. As Finna took her seat, three appeared and clambered up into the chair he'd inhabited the night before. Finna, do you know Philum and Drumthortle? Asked Aunt Jenny. No. Jenny made introductions all round. Flora arrived with more tea, meat pies, fruit, and cheese. "So why have you come, Finna?" asked Aunt Jenny, once everyone had food and drink. "It is best to have a local guide or escort in these lands. They are inhabited by many powerful beings, not all of whom are welcoming of visitors." At this point, Big Tom got up from beside Aunt Jenny, set his front paws on the table, and leaned forward to gaze at the Peri. She smiled and looked him square in the eyes. After a while, he got down, walked in a circle or two, and laid his head in Aunt Jenny's lap. She petted him. "He looks out for you," said Finna. "That's good. You inspire loyalty. That's looked well upon hereabouts." "So it seems. I'd have thought him larger from the tales." "From the tales? It is not easy to pass through the burning lands, and so the story spreads." The Peri nibbled a meat pie. "So you've come to offer me an escort?" "If you like. You're traveling to Jinnabad?" "So they say." Aunt Jenny smiled and sipped her tea. After a bit, she turned to the dwarf. "What do you think, drummer? Is there room in our party for another?" "Aye, Jen," he rumbled. "She's right. Local escort's good to have in these parts. Philum counts some, and I know rocks and mountains, but Perry's and Nephil and Jin made this place what it is. It's a good offer." Philum nodded. Finna looked over Aunt Jenny's shoulder and nodded. "I can watch her when you can't," she said softly. Aunt Jenny turned to look over her shoulder, but no one was visible there. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you could see him, your ghostly guardian. He stays so close." She paused as if listening. "I see. He says he can only reach you in dreams." "Who?" Aunt Jenny challenged her. After a short pause, Finna answered, "He says you call him Dr. Tom," and with a laugh continued, "to distinguish him from your other guardian, Big Tom," who looked up and yawned. Aunt Jenny nodded. "And what did you mean by when he can't?" "The magic here, so close to chaos, is hard for a shade to withstand. They are naught but form with very little substance. They are more at home among the forms and inhabitants of dream, far duskward of here. There is so little fire, energy to them, that they of chaos can overwhelm them. I could help a little, and your love and your marginalis sustain him some. But into Jinnistan and beyond, if that's where your path lies," she shook her head. Aunt Jenny closed her eyes and sat quietly. She could almost feel his hand on her shoulder and the comfort of his touch. She breathed in deeply, opened her eyes, and said, "All right, that makes sense, or as much as anything in this realm does, or these realms, perhaps." "You are correct, Jennifer. Jinnistan, like Dream and the Summerlands and Fatala, is a realm of its own that borders on the Halflands. Just where the Halflands or the marshes start or end is hard to say. The realms themselves are distinct with their own nature, laws, and magic." Aunt Jenny nodded and turned to Philum. "Does that mean there are limits to how far you can go and communicate through the root meat?" "It depends upon the sorts of roots and fungus. Some have more magic and can hear and be heard across realms. Oak, ash, hawthorn, and many mushrooms are particularly strong." "Can you relay messages to the World Tree or the region of the Summer-Fall from here?" "Yes." "And further, into Jinnistan and beyond?" "'Tis harder, but possible. Farther than your shade can safely travel, but not so reliably." "I had him tell the queens that we might try to keep in touch this way." "I will try, Aunt Jenny. That's all I can ask." Helgrim came over to their table. "Lady, Aunt Jenny, your party seems to have grown in size. Will you need more supplies? Steeds? You know we might very well at that." And so the party that crossed the river on the ferry an hour later had expanded to include a dryad, a dwarf, and a Peri, and 3 more marcher ponies. They were well supplied from Flora's larder. And Aunt Jenny and her companions, old and new, will continue their journey into Jinnistan next time.